Senator Ron Johnson out of Wisconsin. Good to see you. I know you're there on Capitol Hill. Back to business. You've been very busy talking to the IRS. You had some questions about why they're showing up at a journalist's doorstep. Matt Taibbi, for those of you that don't know, Matt Taibbi is a journalist, longtime journalist, actually rather liberal for most of his career. And he happened to get his hands on the Twitter files, thanks to Elon Musk. The day he was set to testify before lawmakers, he got a knock on his door. It was the IRS. And Senator Johnson, I'd like to know, what was that about in your view?
Well, first of all, people have to understand how unbelievable, but unfortunately in the Biden administration, all too believable it would be that the IRS would send an agent out to knock on a taxpayer's door. I think that probably never happens. Okay,
I've never heard of it.
I couldn't get the IRS commissioner to admit that, but I've never heard of it. My wife used to be an IRS agent. That's not the first step the IRS takes in notifying a taxpayer that there may be an issue with his tax return. But the fact that they did it on the day that Matt Taibbi is testifying before the House Weaponization Subcommittee, talking about the Twitter files, the chances of those things coinciding are infinitesimal. And so, I asked the new IRS Commissioner, Danny Werfel, to make sure that he provides us the information that Chairman Jordan has requested as well. Any documents related to exactly how that agent showed up on the door. Again, do I think they're going to be transparent? That's certainly not my experience with the federal agencies, that they're transparent with Congress, which means the American public. But this is just a bizarre circumstance. And let's face it, we have evidence, certainly under the Obama administration, of the IRS weaponized against American citizens in the whole Tea Party targeting. We certainly see the unequal application of justice as the IRS appears to have, or at least the Justice Department has appeared to turn the other, just ignore Hunter Biden, even though we have emails from his basically financial advisor, Eric Schwerin, telling him that he's going to have to pony up another $400,000, report that as income, which he didn't report. But there's no enforcement.
Matt Taibbi is the big problem. He's the one that you need the IRS agents knocking on the door for. Do you think it was an intimidation tactic? What's your sort of gut on this? I know it's early.
I can't think of another innocent explanation for it. It's just so bizarre. Like I said, I think the IRS commissioner's answer to my question when I said, how common is this? He should have said it's completely not common. It just never happens, is I think what would have been a truthful answer. But of course, he didn't answer the question. So hopefully we'll get some documents and maybe even whistleblowers coming forward. That's really what Congress needs nowadays, is because the agencies are not transparent, because Congress has little to no enforcement authority, particularly when you've got an administration in charge of the Justice Department that we're investigating, that they're not going to help us enforce our subpoenas or our compulsory actions. So it requires people in the agencies that have integrity, that want to see integrity and credibility restored to their agencies. They have to come forward and talk to Congress under the whistleblower protections, which are pretty robust.
I get it. It's a tough road ahead, but you have the people, I think, on your side, and people have a whole lot of common sense, and they don't like what's going on, and they don't like the idea that maybe somehow the Biden family has been making money off of Joe Biden's political position, possibly for many years. We don't know all the details of this, other than we can report, of course, that Hunter Biden was making $600,000, which is a heck of a lot for a board job over at Burisma. And look, it's a lot of money, especially when you know anything about the natural gas industry there in Ukraine. What else are you learning?
Well, first of all, understand how long the media has known about the potential corruption of what they turned back, many, many years ago, Biden Inc. James Biden, Sarah Biden, Joe Biden. Turning profiting off the family name. The mainstream media has known about this for a long time. Then, of course, Senator Grassley and I, once the association with Burisma in Ukraine surfaced, we started turning our attention to Hunter Biden. Had to investigate during COVID. Unfortunately, didn't have the full cooperation of our Republican conference, who thought it was too political. So we didn't have the subpoena authority that we would have liked to have had. But again, conducting an investigation during COVID was challenging, but we still soldiered on, and we issued a report that was chock full of all kinds of very troubling information. It showed a vast web of financial foreign entanglements. Millions and millions of dollars being transferred between, for example, the Chinese interests connected to the Communist Party of China, Ukraine, Russia. I think something like a dozen countries is what the Biden family grifters were trying to capitalize on different deals. And we issued this in September 2020. Now, the mainstream media looked at it. They said, there's nothing new here. They haven't proven a crime. Well, it's not our job to prove a crime. It's to uncover and expose the truth, which we did. Now what's surfacing is pretty much just a little bit more detail, more family members. We were able to look at Treasury reports through the end of 2019. Now the House is getting some of those same Treasury records up to more current. Again, it's hard to trace all the money, but there were millions of dollars of wire transfers. What the House has to do is follow up on our investigations, subpoena bank records to see the outflow from Hunter Biden's accounts to potentially, banks in the Cayman Islands or the Bahamas. Again, we just don't know. But Trish, I'll tell you who probably does know. Chinese intelligence, Russian intelligence, Iranian intelligence. That's the extent to which Joe Biden is compromised. And that's what I find so interesting about the fact that Cathay Bank, who, of course, they disavow any connection to the Chinese Communist Party, just like TikTok does. They disavow the same connection. I guess we all take that with a grain of salt. But, my guess is the fact that they coughed up those bank records, that was just a shot across the bow of President Biden saying, this is just a sampling of the kind of information that we're willing to release if you don't pretty well toe the line.
A family can have a business, right? Like there's nothing to prevent Hunter Biden from having his gigs and having his career. And he's got the art thing, which, by the way, I personally find a little suspicious because art is so incredibly subjective. And now you got people paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for Hunter Biden's art. But I guess the question is whether or not you can draw some kind of parallel between, okay, he's getting paid a lot of money for things that he really doesn't have experience in, and whether or not that's having an effect on policy.
Well, I realize that, but isn't it obvious why he's being paid that amount of money? Now, again, when you're kind of selling influence and buying influence, you're not exactly sure how it's going to eventually pay off. Yeah. But it's just obvious that people were buying influence, and they were trading off the family name. I mean, that's what was happening here. And it is interesting that Hunter Biden fully understood that he was under investigation by the IRS in terms of his tax filings. Together with myself and Senator Grassley, we invited him to testify before us, to come in for a transcribed interview. And yet now the House is obtaining Treasury records where the activities continue. The grift continues. They are just so brazen. They are so secure that they are above the law, that nobody's ever going to touch them. That, rather than kind of closing up shop and go, we probably ought to quit doing this, particularly if, Joe, the big guy, is going to run for president, potentially become president. Maybe we ought to cease our activities, but they're brazenly carrying on. One of the activities is with the art. And you're right. Listen,
I mean, it's not bad. Don't get me wrong. I'm not an art critic, so I can't actually give it, a fair critique. But that's kind of the problem with art, right? Like it's extremely subjective, and how much somebody's willing to pay. You wonder what that is. That's a good potential example of influence peddling.
And we're supposed to believe they've got firewalls so that the Bidens don't know who's actually paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for these pieces of art that he's cranking out in 10, 15 minutes. I mean, who knows? It's obvious, and it at a minimum looks incredibly sleazy.
For sure.
And when you are president of the United States and you are the son of a president of the United States, you don't do things that look sleazy.
What do you say to critics? We give all sides here, right? To those who say, well, look at Donald Trump's son-in-law. And look at the deal that he's doing with Saudi Arabia, and they invested all this money in his new private equity fund. What do you say? Because I do actually think there's a difference, but I want to hear it from you. Yeah. What do you say to those who say it's just kind of the same as Trump?
Well, first of all, is we can count on the press to robustly investigate any kind of allegation against Trump and his children. We don't have to worry about a biased media covering up for President Trump. They're going to do everything they can. They've done everything they could to destroy him and his family. So first of all, as a public that's trying to discern the truth, if Donald Trump and his kids have done something wrong, it is going to be exposed, and then you'll be able to make your own judgment. That's not been the case with the Bidens. The mainstream media has covered up for them. And I've witnessed it up close and personal after Senator Grass and I dropped our reports September 20th. Very few news reports in which what news reports were on our report, just, well, there's nothing new here. Nothing. They're not alleging any crimes. And it was just readily dismissed, as they dismissed and covered up for the laptop, which got dropped.
And let's not forget that. Let's never forget that. To think the New York Post was not able to tweet because somehow they were fake news about that darn laptop. I ran into it myself when we reported on it. That was no-go territory. The idea that was no-go and then somehow all of them was verified, that's scary stuff. That's like China level, North Korea style stuff, Senator.
Well, take a look at, the Russian collusion hoax. It was completely made up. And so somebody was feeding the media that false story. I mean, there's so much corruption. There's so many different avenues you can go down with this story that it overwhelms people. Before
I let you go, I do want to ask you about Homeland Security, because you and Mr. Mayorkas there, Secretary Mayorkas, had a little bit of a dust up. What's your sense of our border?
Well, I think this is the third time that he's come before a committee as a secretary, maybe one other time. And every time he comes before the committee, I'm asking him for the numbers on the border. And he's never forthright. He knows how many people they've returned, but he just seems to not quite understand how many people they've let in. So you put the numbers together for him. The numbers are somewhere at a minimum of 4. Probably over 5 million people have been let into this country, either encountered, processed, and dispersed in record time, or come in as a known or unknown gotaway. 5.3 million people is the number I went into the hearing with. He knocked that down a little bit. But just put that in perspective, 28 states have a population less than 5.3 million. 20 states have a population less than 4 million. We are letting in that number of people. And this administration says, it's a top priority. No, it's obviously not. Their top priority was to open up the border and flood America with illegal immigrants, and they could care less about the human
depredation. Why do that? I mean, it's just, this to me, it's just dumb policy.
No, it's a disaster. They don't know who those 4 to 5 million people are. There's no way they can vet them. Certainly they don't know who the known or unknown gotaways are, about 1.7 million people. So whether it's gang activity, the flood of fentanyl that's killing folks, the level of sex trafficking, human trafficking. New York Times. I entered a New York Times article into the record yesterday that's talking about 85,000 unaccompanied children. We have no idea where they are, but there's plenty of evidence that 13, 14, 15-year-olds are being basically put to work in involuntary servitude into factories in this country.
Wild. Because what? It's politics? Because the border idea was Trump's? I remember a time when actually plenty of Democrats were all for real borders. This is not controversial stuff. It really isn't. You're a country. The country has borders.
No, listen, we had, I think, more than 80 votes for the Secure Fence Act of 2006, and that was a lot of Democrats voting on that. Those exact same Democrats that voted for that are in the Senate today, and they're voting against, for example, just completing the wall that we already paid for. It's cost us more not finishing the wall than if we would have just completed it. But again, Democrats voted against numerous amendments in committee and on the floor to just complete that wall that we already paid for. So,
okay, dumb politics. Tell me, what's the biggest focus for you right now? What do you want to see? What do you need from America? What is sort of your passion?
My passion is to tenaciously pursue, uncover, and expose the truth across a whole wide range of issues. But you need to take a look at everything this administration has done has weakened this country. The open borders, the flood of deadly drugs, the rising crime in our cities, 40-year high inflation, record gas prices, the war on fossil fuel, the embarrassing and dangerous surrender in Afghanistan and embolden our enemies. If you laid out a plan to weaken this country and incentivize our adversaries to become aggressive, I don't think you could have had a better plan than what the Biden administration policies have actually done to this country. So it's about pointing out the truth about what Biden and the radical left policies are doing in this country so we can try and reverse them before it's too late. I try and point out Venezuelans voted themselves into poverty in just a couple of decades. They voted themselves into poverty. America, the radical leftists want us on that same path.
For sure. No, I mean, I remember I was a young analyst at Goldman Sachs covering Venezuela when that all happened, trading emerging debt markets, sovereign debt, fun stuff, right? I guess the fact that it was Venezuela that we were watching made it a little more interesting, but you could see the handwriting on the wall. And you know what? That debt doesn't even trade in America anymore. Nobody goes near it. It's a shame. It is an absolute shame. And I worry that could become us. Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, working hard for America. Thank you so much for all your time today.
Take care. Stay well.